I'm Kate Peterson, Director of Get Lit Programs, a nonprofit housed within Eastern Washington University. Get Lit is a week-long celebration of literature traditionally held in Spokane, Washington. This year, all of our events are virtual, and virtually all of them are free. To learn more about Get Lit, to find this year's schedule of events, or to donate, please click on the link below to visit our website, getlitfestival.org. Now I'd like to introduce Claire Walla, Get Lit's Assistant Coordinator.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all for joining us for Kink. Kink is an anthology of literary fiction that opens the door to topics of love, desire, and BDSM. The book includes works by well-known fiction writers such as Roxane Gay and Carmen Maria Machado, with Kwon and Garth Greenwell as editors. While the works within the anthology cover topics that are often kept private, such as bondage, power play, and submissive-dominant relationships, the true power of these stories lies within how they all explore interest and desire across the sexual spectrum. This reading and conversation features Kwon, Callum Angus, Vanessa Clark, and Larissa Pham. We're also joined by Leona Vandermolen, who's going to help us with introductions. Leona is an actor and writer from Ohio. She received her MFA from Eastern Washington University, where she served as the managing editor of Willow Springs. Her work has appeared in Santa Fe Writers Project Quarterly, Heavy Feather Review, Opossum, Wakama, among others. She currently lives in Spokane, Washington, with her cat, Moon Unit. Welcome, Leona.
Thank you, Claire. And I just want to take a second to thank Kate, Claire, and everyone who worked really hard to make Get Lit a success, because it's so great that we're still having this right now. And I'm really happy to be here. Also, speaking to my cat, I'm sorry if he shouts during anyone's intro. That's not my intention. When Kate first asked me to introduce this event, I assumed it was because she thought I was the kinkiest person she knows, but I don't think that's actually the case. I'm going to take the compliment and not ask her later. And speaking of kink, let's just get into it. I have the honor of introducing this wonderful group of writers who are part of this excellent anthology, not anthology, I guess, collection of stories. And our first reader is Callum Angus, a trans writer and editor currently based in Portland, Oregon. His first book, A Natural History of Transition, will be out later this month. Yay! But you can pre-order now from Metonymy Press. His work has appeared in Nat Brute, West Branch, LA Review of Books, Catapult, The Common Seventh Wave magazine, and elsewhere. He has received support from Lambda Literary and Signal Fire Foundations for the Arts, and he holds an MFA from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He edits the journal Smoke and Mold. Please welcome Cal Angus.
Thanks so much, Leona. Thank you, Claire, Kate, everybody at Get Lit, and of course, all my wonderful kink companions. I'm so excited to be here and to talk and read. And so without further ado, I'll just read for a few minutes from the story that I have included in Kink. It's called Canada, and it's a short story, but I'm gonna pick up the last 3 paragraphs of it. And all you need to know is that it alternates between 2 different points of view of 2 people in a couple. One, a trans man named Jay, and one, his partner named Nina, who has been trying on Jay's binder and walking around town and kind of seeing what it's like to try on this different identity. The bugs are gone or burning now. I should say this is Jay that we're starting with. The bugs are gone or burning now. The last paycheck's been collected, and I'm sitting in my truck wondering where to go. After hosing down the greenhouse, we sprayed a chemical foam over everything the white flies might have touched. And now the only thing appealing is dead, dried meat. So I buy 2 packs of jerky at the corner store before going home. Out front, the rhododendrons bloom the 3rd time this spring, like nothing's wrong. The rain gauge is Seattle full. Lawn moldy, worms drowned and decomposing. New England has lost its shit. On the kitchen table, junk mail piles up. Debt collections, library fines, student loans, all auto-mailed in cellophane windows to my old name. Husks of my former self collecting like the papery exoskeletons of dragonflies. I hear Nina's car pull in while I'm chewing jerky, and it's with the salty, sweet tang in my mouth that I see her, chest flattened, dressed in my clothes. I pull her into the bedroom and tear them off her. It's been so long since it's been this natural, since I've seen my hands, stained green from the tomato plants, cling to her body like she's an ancient ruin in jungle country. I want to erode her stone by stone, make her fall apart. This next section is from Mina. Driving home, I hit 5 green lights: moss, sea glass, celery, mouthwash, new leaves. I park at the quick stop down the block from home and get excited, scared in my chest as I walk in. Ding goes the welcome bell. No one looks at me. I'm pulling a ginger ale from the cooler when I see him, 2 aisles over, hair sweated flat, the hint of a beard starting on his chin. He passes by me on his way to the checkout, but I don't call out, and Jay doesn't see me. He buys his miserable lunch and leaves, looking haggard from sleeping not at all, or just in his car. My invisibility feels like a passport. Suddenly everything feels open, like I could adapt to anything. When I get home, Jay's truck is in the driveway. I walk into the kitchen and he sees me. At first I think he might get angry. He's never said I couldn't wear them, and we've shared clothes before. But then a familiar look in his eye. It's been since before the sap stopped flowing, before I worried about losing the geese, that I saw that look. We go to the bedroom, and I expect him to protest when I climb on top because he's tired, but the hormones make him hornier, and his green hands are on me. It's disturbing to watch them creep like vines around my areola. After we finish, I think about this coming back together, what it will look like for us with so much different and still the same. Then I hear the squawking, louder now, and even inside I know it's a flock. I rush to the window, and their dark swarm appears in the triangle of sky between the barn and the sugar maple. North, their V is pointing north. They no longer want even our winter warmth. I run to the kitchen to warn Jay that these last signs of seasons are fleeing us, but he's already heard. He's pulled out the bottle of champagne we were saving and popped the cork, saluting a birdless state, toasting the last of them with big gulps, their squawks petering out as they head away from this unseasonable heat. After sex, I like to water the houseplants, share with them my body after fruitless mating, and feel the heat of their little blossom breaths on my skin. Then the geese start up. I go to the kitchen window, and there they are, going. Nina comes out looking like she's about to cry, and part of me wants to go to her and tell her we'll be fine without them. But these days all she cares about is that she'll never see a goose again. She goes back to the bedroom and shuts the door. The last goose passes over our patchwork of scorched fields, our dried up lakes, our barren greenhouses. If geese can't hack it here, good riddance. Good riddance to the delicate snowberry, to black-footed ferrets, to salamanders that can't deal with rising water. I want nothing incapable of change. I want cowbirds and milfoil. I want kudzu and knapweed and snakeheads and cheatgrass and bark beetles. I want the false webworm. I want plants that can withstand a flood, insects that won't apologize for taking up space, things that shouldn't thrive but do because conditions are finally ripe. Thank you.
I really wish that we could hear the applause of everyone. I like to run it in my head. Just, it's in there. I can hear it. I can hear everyone clapping. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Callum. Our next reader is Vanessa Clark, an intersex trans femme author that has been featured in Harper's Bazaar, Pop Sugar, Vice, and Them, and has written articles for Vox. Her pronouns are she, they. Even though she lives in New Jersey, she is more likely spending her free time at some of the best indie bookstores, parks, museums, and record shops in New York City. Please welcome Vanessa Clark.
Thank you for inviting me into this. And I just want to say that it's been so fun being a part of this anthology. I'm truly honored, and I always will be. I'll start with my story, Mirror, Mirror, and I'm going to choose the beginning, not because it's an easy start, but because it's actually my favorite part of the story, because it introduces these two characters from completely different walks of life pretty straightforwardly. So I'll start right now. I think I die if I don't find my destiny soon, were some of the first words he said. It was an afternoon in-call, and the boyish shyness of his voice betrayed that this was his first time. Okay, so have you ever dated an escort before? No, ma'am. Where are you calling from? Upper West Side. Most of the men who used my phone service were a type, chasers, size queens, for women with well-hung functional cocks like mine. Usually, my size was a kink in and of itself. These men didn't seek light domination, restraining, teasing, verbal abuse, and choking. Not even me fucking applying them to death was the be-all and end-all. There was some of that, and how they loved that. Of course, but the service they sought was rarely the full thing. The fancy they craved, needed, obsessed over, was just to see it. They hardly needed to touch or feel. Just seeing it would get them off. Sometimes their basking in my beauty was enough to thrill us both. As I kicked back to my office chair from my village apartment, I caught some breeze from my loud window fan. I applied my dark, hibiscus red lipstick to pursed lips, already feeling myself in my freshly sculpted beat. Nancy Wilson's Time Out for Love played from my radio. I like to kiss you in front of the mirror, the stranger said in a newly husky tone. And I asked, as in get to the fucking point, I don't have all day. And I'd like to go down on you. So you're into size, I asked. He chuckled. Yeah, I do have experience with that, I'll tell you that, but I think I'm ready to take more and bigger like you. Like to make it come, like to make it come. So you say that you're a cocksucker. Almost thought he hung up on me. He was that quiet. But through the silence, I heard him breathe so softly before a slow, simple declaration. I am a cocksucker. In that moment, I imagined him floating through the air on a cloud of silence that followed. You've never called an ad before, correct? I asked him, point blank. I couldn't help myself. I laughed sweetly as I caressed my chest. You guessed right, ma'am. With a smile, I nodded. I ordered him to describe himself to me. Well, I'm 30. I'm single. I'm about 5'10", 185 pounds. I haven't been intimate with someone in a long time. I'm tired of dreaming about it and masturbating in my sleep. I work all day and too much. He paused here, as if to take stock of the person he just described. I think I deserve some fun time. Wall Street is stressful sometimes, you know? Uh-huh, I replied. I might need a little bit of help and encouragement, though. It's been a while, but I want to get off to you, Tina, so bad. I'd like to get together with you now if it's not too late or too early. I can make it in half an hour. Okay, I got you, but my afternoon schedule is full, I'm afraid. But I have a spot open for tonight. I give him time and place. Will that be all right with you? That's fine with me. I'm familiar with that area and that joint. Great. Can you spend $150? I crossed my legs and he gently confirmed, yes, I can. Ta-da.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone's voices that actually wrote them. It's really refreshing to hear people read. Our next reader is Larissa Pham, an artist and writer from Brooklyn. Her essays and criticism have appeared in the Paris Review Daily, Book Forum, Guernica, The Nation, and elsewhere. She is the author of Fantasian, a new lover's novel from Badlands Unlimited, and Pop Song, forthcoming from Catapult in May of this year. Please welcome Larissa Pham.
Hi, thanks for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. So I'm reading from my story, Trust, which is about a couple who don't know each other that well and they go upstate together, as one does. So I'm gonna read a funny part and then a sexy part. They're staying in a cabin a few miles outside of Bristol, Vermont. It sits on the property of a couple who rent it out to vacationers. When they pull up into the gravel driveway, they see two horses, a big, beautiful mare and a squat little pony, flicking their tails in a meadow next to the property. The youngish man who greets them isn't the owner of the property, he explains, but he works for them. He introduces himself as Jeff. He's a local who's lived in Vermont his whole life. Jeff shakes their hands, the man's first, then hers. Wow, Jeff says, we don't get a lot of Asians up here. He looks her up and down like she might suddenly change shape. She smiles a little in a trying to be friendly way. Yeah, we're from New York. The blonde hair is nice, Jeff says. It's cool. Don't see much of that here either. Thanks, she says. Well, the man says, let's go see the house. When she pees, as she does immediately upon their arrival, the sound of it is audible in the tiny cabin. You should turn on the water when you pee, he tells her as she steps out of the bathroom to wash her hands. It's more considerate. But it's the same sound of water either way, she says, confused. No, one is piss and one is water, he says. I can turn on the faucet if you want, she says. But she doesn't really mean it. She's an environmentalist. They have sex before they even begin to think about dinner. The light is warm and falls onto everything in golden plains. In bed, she puts her hands above her head and waits for him to do what she wants him to do. She doesn't understand why he won't just take her, why he doesn't seem to understand what to do with her wrists. It seems to her that there's only one thing to do when someone puts her hands over her head. He is sweating above her, his skin flushed. The blood blossoms in a dark, rosy V from the center of his chest up into his neck, coloring his narrow face. She can imagine it flowing through his body, moving toward his cock and away from his brain. Do what you want with me, she says. He doesn't say anything. She presses her wrists into the bed to give him an idea of what she wants, though nothing he could do would ever be enough. What she wants is for him to understand her, to anticipate her every need. She wants to submit to him so thoroughly that he possesses even her desires, recognizing her so thoroughly that she never has to ask for a thing. Please, she says. There's this way she has of looking at him, like something caught. She doesn't talk enough, but when she talks, she talks too much, like a nervous child. He wants to hate this, her jittery vulnerability, the way she darts around difficult conversations, but he can't. He's tantalized by the edge of what he suspects is there, a deep and lonely desire, a void that he could fill. Romantically, he thinks he wants her to show it to him, to hold still long enough to be touched in the heart. Now she is beneath him. On her back, her small breasts are flat, the areola dark against her skin. Please, she says again. Suddenly, he wants to hurt her, not in the way she wants him to. He has an idea of what she wants. She wants him to be brutal and present. She wants him to pin her down and choke her out. She wants him to slap her and shove his fingers in her mouth and say dirty, unforgivable things. She wants him to do what he wants, but she wants those wants to be her wants. I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. I just want to say one final time before I introduce our final reader that everyone should check out this collection if this hasn't convinced you enough, because I promise you're going to want to read everything in here as well as finish these stories that we're just getting a taste of today. It's really a great collection of stories by so many amazing authors. And our final reader today is Aro Kwon, who, following her reading, will be facilitating a conversation with all of today's readers. Aro Kwon's nationally best-selling first novel, The Incendiaries, is published by Riverhead and Virago Little Brown, and it is being translated into 7 languages. Named a Best Book of the Year by over 40 publications, The Incendiaries received the Housatonic Book Award and was a finalist or nominated for 7 other prizes, including the National Book Critics Circle Award for Best First Book and Los Angeles Times First Book Prize. Kwon was named one of the 4 writers to watch by the New York Times. She also co-edited Kink, which was published with Simon & Schuster in February of this year. Kwon's writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Paris Review, NPR, and elsewhere. She has received fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, Yaddo, McDowell, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and the Swanee Writers Conference. Born in Seoul, Kwon has lived most of her life in the United States. Please welcome Aro Kwon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leona, and thank you to Get Lit and Kate and Claire. Thank you, Larissa, Vanessa, and Cal, and thank you everyone who's here. I know this is a really hard time for a lot of people, and it's really good to be here with you all. Thank you for taking this time to talk and think about fiction and writing and kink and not about other things. So I'll read very briefly from this from my story from the start of it. My story is called Safe Word. After some discussion, they decided they'd both benefit from professional guidance. It was like doing yoga, they figured. Hazardous at first to go through the poses without an instructor's help. The woman who opened the door was shorter than her pictures had suggested she'd be. On her website, she had been dressed in black pores of single-piece latex. Now, in a buttoned white shirt with rolled sleeves, a simple black skirt, and calf-high boots so shiny Paul could see his blurred reflection, she looked less like a Mistress Ava Adamson than she did like a normal person, almost. "Hello, Paul," she said. She took his hand in a predictably strong grip. Dark hair cupped her jaw, the tips curving under her chin like a gladiatorial helmet. She was roughly their age, still young as opposed to young, period. "And you," she said, turning to Cheon, who was standing half a step behind him, her hand in his. "I'm so glad to see you. Come along." She turned and left them. Still holding hands, they followed the dominatrix. Down the long hall, then they were in a dim room with flashing mirrors and contraptions. Everything was an elaborate variation on something else, something he understood. A black padded massage table, but sturdier, buckle restraints hanging from its corners. A cross, but X-shaped, also dangling restraints. At the end of the room, something like a throne, high-backed, theatrical, gilded, the center of its seat cut away. Then what looked like a cat's scratching post, except that it was human-sized, and again equipped with restraints. A mess of whips and crops, canes and paddles lined the walls. Cheon's grip on his hand had gone loose. "May I take your coats?" the dominatrix said, smiling. Tattoos shimmered through the thin fabric of her shirt. "She'd be right back," she said. As soon as the door closed behind her, Cheon turned to him. Her eyes were wide and urgent. "The envelope," she whispered. "Oh, right," he said, pulling it from his pocket. The website had instructed them to leave their payment, their tribute, what the fuck, out in plain sight at the start of their session. "Why are we whispering? Where am I supposed to put this?" "Maybe on that table," she said. He smoothed out the envelope and left it on the modified massage table. This woman was making more per hour than most bankers he knew. Cheon was hugging herself, looking down. She'd agonized that morning over what clothes she should wear, which was pretty funny, since, as he pointed out, she probably wasn't going to be in them very long. After 5-6 outfit changes, she'd ended up choosing the first thing she tried on, a slim wool dress with stockings, an ensemble at least 15 degrees too flimsy for the day. But now, underdressed, clutching herself, she looked tiny, miserable. He closed his arms around her, warming her up. He almost asked if she was all right, but maybe it was insensitive to imply there was any reason for her not to be all right, and why should there be? Here they were in a dungeon in Chelsea, a dominatrix on her way. What could be off about this? So he kissed the top of her head, the white pure line of her part, and hoped the touch would say what needed to be said, whatever it was. He was so tired, he realized, of not knowing what he was supposed to do or say. Okay, and I'll stop there and get to the discussion. So I thought I'd just start with, I know when Garth, my co-editor, Garth Greenwell, when Garth and I approached you all for work, it was really important to us for a variety of reasons to keep the request pretty open. It was important to us not to gatekeep what kink is, what people find kink to be. And I wonder, and I remember, I think the wording was we asked for fiction that engages meaningfully with kink as you define it. So I wonder if you can talk about the experience of working on your stories, and maybe so that there's, I don't know, yeah, in any order.
I'm happy to break the ice. Well, when you both emailed me, I had already had a story that was kind of the base of trust ready to go, and I didn't really know where it was gonna fit. It didn't have like a very strong BDSM dynamic in it, but it did have a very strong power dynamic between the two characters. And the the one, like it's kind of clear, like there's the man and there's the girl. There's an age difference. There's also a power difference. And in working together on that story with you both, I was really interested in like emphasizing like the different kinds of power differentials that were running between these two characters, and seeing how a BDSM dynamic could like complicate those things, because there were these certain things that I think the girl character was asking for within the confines of a sexual or BDSM dynamic, and then other things that she needed from like outside of that dynamic. So that was really fun to just play with behind my selection.
I'm happy to jump in. I also had a story. This story, Canada, had been kind of sitting with me for a while, and when Garth first asked me if I had a piece, it was I was pretty sure that was the one I wanted to send, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be kinky enough or sexy enough, because in that story and in most of my writing, sex or pleasure that's usually found through sex, it's not the main avenue through which I experience kink in my own life. Like as a trans person, like I don't always have access to sexual pleasure through like physical sexual acts. Like that's something that I can't always get in tune with, like getting my body and my brain on the same wavelength. And so in this story, there is some sex, but I think the bulk of it happens with the kind of moving back and forth between these two perspectives, Nina trying on the kind of binder and the identity and gender identity of Jay, her partner, and that trading back and forth of like very intimate details of their life. And I wanted to mirror that in the structure of the story as well. So I can't really see it when I read it, but it's just alternating between first person point of view paragraphs of each of them. And if you're not kind of paying attention, it begins to blur who is who. And that's on purpose, because I think in queer relationships and in my own relationship, it is sometimes blurry, like who is who. And sometimes that's kind of kinky and wonderful, and trying on the different roles of top or bottom or other kinds of things can become this kind of wonderful whirlwind over time. And I was glad that it was kinky enough in the end. To be included in this collection with all of these stories was really exciting.
I remember that one of the first editorial notes that you guys sent to me was mentioning the sweetness of my story, which I did intentionally, and it made me so excited that you guys saw that, because I like the juxtaposition of a man that is never named. We never know who his character is that Tina meets, and it's clearly a completely business sexual exchange. It's not meant to be romantic or flirty or sweet, or sweetened by nature. But I really liked the play of how having these two people, one that works on Wall Street and a sex worker, a trans sex worker, who comes together, and just for that moment in their session, they just kind of escape with one another and play around with the idea of, okay, we could be something, or we're not really. So it was just really fun playing into that while making it very kinky, alongside the grittiness of the city and the grittiness of just what they're doing together. So it was just a really joy doing it. I'm glad that you guys saw what I was doing. So it made me, like I said, it's just an honor, and I'm just glad that it all came through nicely, thankfully.
Well, it was such an honor. I mean, truly, Garth and I were so thrilled to get to work with you all, and really so honored that you trusted us with your work. And it's been such a joy to talk with you and to hear more about your thinking about behind these stories. A question I have is, and I'm not sure, I don't want to assume this, but I will say that my experience of writing, especially when it has to do, when writing that is so centered on bodies and writing that is so centered on physical desire, for me is an experience of like contending with a great deal of shame and fear and anxiety, and there's probably guilt in there. As a Korean woman, as an ex-Christian Korean woman, as a queer ex-Christian queer woman, like I can only write sometimes if I tell myself no one has to see it. That's like a refrain for myself. Is no one has to see this. It's okay. you're not going to die if you write this down. And so I wonder, and I don't want to assume that you yourselves contend with any shame and any fear while you're writing, but how do you contend with the voices that say no, the voices that say danger, danger? And again, like any order.
I can speak to that a little bit. So, because I've been thinking recently, I've been very fortunate to work with an editor who is also a trans person, and that's the first editor that I've been able to work with on a piece of personal essay that I'm writing about kind of bodies and shame and some of that. And it made me realize, as she was kind of pushing me to go further in this piece, that like before I kind of had this armor up as a writer, where if an editor or a reader or somebody was telling me that they wanted more backstory about a trans character, I was sometimes resistant to give that, whether it was about their transition or surgeries or anything like that, because there is kind of like a prying gaze of a cis reader that wants to know all of these details right up front, which I'm not always like willing to put that in there and to kind of feed that desire. But then when I was suddenly kind of writing for a trans editor and a trans audience more, I realized that I had maybe come to rely on that a little bit too much as like a safety mechanism or self-preservation mechanism for not going more deeply into some of these areas, or at least not asking myself why I wasn't going there. And it ended up making the piece much stronger. So I think these days I'm thinking a lot about like audience and who am I writing for and who needs to hear what, and maybe it would help somebody else later on down the line if that's something that I'm able to tap into now.
I was a sex columnist at Nerve back in the day. So I don't think I've ever, it's more like no one has ever told me no until after it was out in the world. So it's kind of just been like, well, I can't, I'm just gonna say it. Like, I don't know, like you might get mad at me. My family has gotten quite upset with me for some of my candor before, but we have more or less worked through that, which has been really important process for me. But I maybe it's kind of similar actually to how you write. But this idea of like, well, no one is going to see it until they see it. And then by the time they see it, like it's already ready for the world and I can't do anything about it. So I just have to allow it to happen to me. But that seems to be the healthiest way of dealing with it for me.
Yeah, similar to Larissa, I write as if no one's really going to read it, and not to sound selfish, but I really just write for myself and try and put as much fun into it as I can so it comes through. And I mean, this from what I can tell, it seems like it translates well, that people seem to be enjoying my writing. So yeah, I mean, I can't really relate too much to shame, but the feeling of like that feeling of, I guess, maybe feeling intimidated or nervous or scared sometimes, I can overcome that by just only writing for myself, because at the end of the day, only you can really satisfy yourself the most, really. Like, you know, because you're not going to please everybody. It's one thing I've always learned. You're not going to please everybody. You can do all the right things, say the right things, write all the right things, and there's always going to be someone that's going to demonize you or misinterpret or take things out of context. So that's why you really have to just come from the heart of just, this is for me. I'm doing it for me, but you know, if everyone else can join me and join the party, then that's even better.
I love that so much. I love what y'all were saying. And yeah, Cal, what you were saying about thinking, well, maybe this could help something else. I have found that the other thing that really helps me is thinking like, well, you know, like 17-year-old me would have like lost her shit if I could have read Kink the anthology when I was 17. I think it really would have meant so much to me. And so that can help too, to think about my younger self and like, how could I help her? Like what can I do for her? I wonder just, I know this has been, so we're in, this is like the 9 millionth day of March of 2020. And it's been an especially hard year for a lot of people to write. It's been really hard for people to read, I know. And I was looking at who's going to be part of this panel. And I was just like, wow, this is a group of people who, because of who we are as people, almost certainly we've been having a really hard time with the onslaught of news. Things have been so hard for Black people, they've been so hard for trans people, they've been so hard for Asian people, they've been so hard. Like, it's just been such a hard time. And I wonder what thoughts you have about anything that's been helping you with writing during this time, during this time of really like great collective hardship.
For me, to be honest, I think Twitter helps a lot, honestly, because in times where all that's going on, people, not just like blue checkmark people, but just everyone just contributes so much about race and transphobia and ableism that it really just, it's like, it makes it's kind of a happy place where it's like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not scared by myself in this. I'm not like, we're not alone and through all this, and with Twitter, it's refreshing to see that people are cheering for us and are there for us, and we don't know these people, and it's so I think Twitter helps. I mean, I know not everyone's into Twitter, and I know Twitter sometimes is not perfect, but in times of things like that, it's comforting to know that that we're not alone, no matter how much it feels that way sometimes.
Vanessa, I will say your Twitter has been a real bright spot on my feed. You have so much different kinds of commentary. It's really, it's just nice to know what you're thinking. Yeah, I think having a sense of community has been really important, like whether it's on or offline. Like, I feel like the things that are happening now, I mean, that's it. So like when when someone sends you an email, they're like, oh, with everything going on, and it's like, yeah. I feel like there is maybe like a mainstream like idea of like our identities as like other, like this doesn't happen to everyone, just like like Asians and Black people and trans people, but like that's us in the room right now. And like I think like being able to access community outside of like maybe like a white cis mainstream has been like invaluable to me, just like knowing that we all exist together, even if like dominant conversations always frame our struggles as other.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in agreement with what you were saying, Larissa, in terms of like the experiences that I've had in the last like 4 or 5 years, right, have kind of informed how I've continued to live and write in this last year. And I've also found, I made the intentional decision to lean more into online community and writing community and on Twitter and other places. And that has been incredibly valuable. It also can become a little bit too much for me sometimes, not necessarily in terms of like who I'm meeting, but more just the sort of constant bombardment if I'm not really monitoring my intake as well as I should be. And so I have found recently that going back to writing and working through an idea is often the one thing that can grab my interest more than the news or more than social media. And sometimes I forget that. And usually when I forget that is when I'm like deep in a pit of sadness or something. But when I do remember and am able to like work through an idea or a problem or something that I want to communicate on the page, that has actually helped the most. Yeah.
That's, yes, I love that. I love that we're all like, also, this is how Twitter is part of our it's part of our writing lives. And yeah, because it's like, especially during a pandemic, I was trying to explain to someone, because I was feeling really angry the other day because, and this happens so often where we're like, I'll just be like, I'm really mad. And then my husband will be like, why? And I'll just say, one man was rude to me on Twitter. And it's so ridiculous, but it's also, it's like, it's where everyone is. And it's like where you go to see what your friends are up to, other than the ones you might be group texting with or whatever. And so that's, and like, so it's where the community is, but it's also where so much of the harm is. And that can be really complicated. But yes, it's also where I've learned so much. I think that's actually my favorite thing about social media is actually like so many opportunities for education. And that's, and that can be really exciting. Well, maybe to segue into that, or to segue into my next question, how do you think about, because I think all of you are like parts of the community and are generous about how you give back. And I wonder how you think about being a writer who gives back, and how do you balance your own writing and reading with what you do maybe more for others, or maybe is it all part of the same thing and thinking of it separately isn't necessarily how you think about it?
Well, one of the things that that's kept me going in this last year and reaching out to other people has been the journal that I edit, Smoke and Mold, which publishes nature writing by trans and two-spirit writers. And for a long time that was something I ran by myself, and recently we've brought on some assistant editors, and so growing that team has felt like even better than I thought that it could. I was sort of hesitant for a long time, and now it's become this really positive force in my life and helps me often find trans writers. We're often the first publication for a lot of writers who appear in our issues. And that's such a great feeling, like being able to share their work, put it in front of people who might be able to present them with an opportunity down the line, and also give structure to something that can provide a valuable experience in publishing and editing and writing. That's something that these writers don't have to build from the ground up, because I think so often marginalized writers of many different identities, because what they want isn't there, they have to go out and they have to make it, which is a tremendous input of energy, to continuously reinvent something just to have a voice and to be represented in a conversation. So thinking about that and how I can fill that kind of void is definitely the other half of like my writing and editing life. And I get a lot of nourishment from editing other people too.
Oh, my downtime. 'Cause I have a pretty busy and I keep my work life private, but I work full time things. But like when I do have the time to actually read something, I try to go to I try to plug it once in a while on Digital Trans Archive, which is a database of trans history that I only heard about this year, but I'm like obsessed with them. And often I try and share. Like I basically just go. It's literally millions of history on there, because often even as trans people, we think that, trans history, it's mostly gone. We don't know anybody other than Marsha and the betrayal blazers. But in fact, that our history has been around for a long time and it's been well documented. And so that's where Digital Trans Archive comes in, where on my downtime, it's like a mix of two things where I can chill and relax and listen to my music, but then also go to Digital Trans Archive and read the articles and things like that. And if there's anything that's really interesting that I think my followers get a kick out of it, I share it on Twitter. It's to me just a nice balance of doing something that actually relaxes me. And that sounds a little nerdy, but it just relaxes me reading trans history. But then sharing it is another way of pouring a little bit of love out there in the world to people, to show them that, look, back in 1800s, there's this beautiful Black trans woman who existed. We don't know her real name, but she existed, and things like that. It just gives a sense of like comfort and just a sense of belonging. I think it's just so important to remind trans people that we always been here. So it's that's my one little balance on top of trying to read. I try, but I try to squeeze a novel in there. Sometimes it's hard. But that's one thing I do on top of the music.
Yeah, I feel like reading is so nourishing. Like um I feel like I am most sad when I do not read, when I am like spending too much time like discoursing and not reading. I haven't been on Twitter much. I appreciate it as a platform, but sometimes, you know, it's like it's a lot. It's like power washing your brain. Um, but I used to work in anti-violence for a couple years. And in this moment, like I have felt that there are times where like people maybe need to hear from someone like me and times where they don't. And like listening to that has been really important to me, but I've also realized that like working in anti-violence and having a sort of trauma focused background has given me some skills that like not everyone has. Um, so I've been really thinking a lot about like what can I say or what can I share that might not be like immediately obvious or like that might be helpful to people. Like I put together like a trauma aware like vicarious trauma awareness like toolkit, which was felt really important. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna, you know, do this because this is something that I know about. And that has felt meaningful outside of my writing work. Cause I think like as writers, we like to think, I don't know, people tell me this. I actually don't personally feel this way, but they're always like, oh, you touch so many lives with your writing. Like, don't worry about it. You don't have to be a doctor. It's like, no, like if I were a doctor, I would know exactly how many lives I'm touching. But when you can like say something that maybe other people can hear, I think that's really helpful.
Yes, and for anyone who doesn't know, Larissa's trauma guide, I saw so many people sharing it over the past few days. Like I feel as everywhere I turn, I saw people sharing it and saying how much it was helping them, and that was really amazing. Well, let's see. I wonder if you all could talk about any other kinky, again, however you would define it, kinky books, stories, art, music, anything that that you found to be nourishing to you and your work, if there's anything.
This might be maybe a little surprising choice, but as everyone knows, I'm a total Bjork fan, and I think the one source of erotic that always turns me on, just excites me, is pagan poetry. It's just just pure eroticism, where she's literally recording her and her husband at the time having sex, but it's in a very artsy and sensual way that I mean, of course, you couldn't get with it on MTV. I mean, you had to either edit it a little bit, but I think that's like one source of inspiration all the time is like if I'm just feeling like I need some inspiration, some a little bit of juice here, I watch or listen to pagan poetry, and I'm reminded of what eroticism is about, which is about intimacy. It's not always about penetration or intercourse, but it's about the bond you have with someone, whether it's your significant other or not. It's really the bottom line about the intimacy. So, and if anyone's never seen pagan poetry, I recommend it. Watch it on YouTube.
Maybe this is like a slightly expected answer, but I do feel like the work of most queer and trans writers is very inspiring because like I don't know. I mean, we can have a whole conversation about like what is kink and what is not kink, but I feel like anything that is like disrupting like the general heteronormative understanding of what sex is very valuable to me as a reader. And I feel like so many texts by like queer and trans authors like are in the process of disrupting that, have it baked in, like are not even engaging at all with the standard heteronormative like structure of like even like what a novel is or like, you know, what a text is supposed to look like. And I find that like just really really great to just be in touch with.
I would just say a lot of art, visual art, and photography is something that will, especially by queer and trans photographers, just different ways of or different takes on kind of the self-portrait and nudity and playing with different props and nature, especially like photography that's outdoors, and putting those bodies, trans bodies, kind of in locations in nature and in the landscape, and putting them in conversation is something that I think about a lot, and that I will often, I'm trying to write more about art these days too, or this year. It's kind of a goal. So that's something that I've been turning to a lot recently.
I love that. And now, Vanessa, now I need to go. Go find this homework assignment too. Well, there's a question from the audience that I think leads well from this. And any questions that come in, anyone who wants to ask a question, we still have a little bit of time for questions. So please send them in if you want to. And or like I have like 20 more questions I could ask. But Erin asks, what advice do you have for young queer white writers and how they can find their writing voice, especially alongside cis and heteronormative dominant culture?
I think for starters, I think it's very important to be a reader first before you're a writer. And these days there's so much queer fiction out there, and young adult, science fiction, literary, it's just so much out there. And it doesn't have to all be Big Five related, it can be even indie books and publishers too. So I would recommend to young writers, read as much as possible. Like seriously, just read a lot. And at some point you're going to find your voice through how much you read. And eventually you will find your own voice. But yeah, it has to start somewhere, and that comes from knowledge and from just reading as much as possible. So that's my number one pro tip: read.
That's great advice. I mean, that's definitely what it comes down to. But I think with that, don't be afraid to take your time a little bit. For myself, and not to generalize too much to other people, but I think for a lot of trans writers especially, you might feel behind at a certain point because of certain life events and things that you've had to figure out and spend time thinking about, that a cis writer might not necessarily. And so I think there can be a pressure, self-imposed pressure, or a deadline that like I have to get this book published or write this thing or publish in such and such a journal before I'm X amount of years old. But if you give yourself the time and you read the books and you build the relationships over the years with editors and other writers, or going to workshops online or in person, or just creating writing groups with like-minded people, whether you're in a university program or not, there is so much out there right now for you to tap into. And if you take the time and kind of plug into that, I think you will definitely start to find your voice that way.
I think my last thing to add on to this really good advice is don't sell yourself. Don't feel pressure to tell a story you're not ready to tell. Write an essay you don't maybe need to write. Unfortunately, we live in like a culture where like there is like still a very dominant perspective, and that can make like being a certain kind of minority voice like feel lucrative in a way that can be ultimately exploitative. And I think it's sometimes hard to know these things when you're a young writer, but like I think protecting yourself as much as possible while still like reading and working on like things you're doing is really important, because like that's you, like you are your work, that's your heart, and you have to keep that safe. Getting very emotional because I've done it before, so.
Yeah, I love everything y'all are saying. And what I might add to that is there's something Toni Morrison says that I think about like every day. And she said, I think I have it memorized now. She says, I stood at the border and claimed it as central. And I let the rest of the world move over to where I was, which I love so much. And I think about that a lot because I think when I write, I have to write from, especially with fiction, which is where, I mean, I write a lot of nonfiction, but for me, where I come most alive is when I'm writing fiction, and I have to write from a place of abundance to a place of abundance. Like I cannot write explaining myself for a white gaze, for a male gaze. Like if I do that, that to me feels like a very impoverished position. I don't want to plead for my humanity. I don't want to plead for the humanity of my characters in any way in my fiction. And so in some ways, I actually try to have a life in which people like me are at the center. You know, I try really hard to, I track my reading, having grown up basically only having read dead white people. I track my reading to make sure that like I'm reading at least as many people of color as I am, as writers who are not, like at least as many, well, queer is so easy. Like the queer part for me is so easy in that like, I know so many queer writers at this point that at this point I'm gently surprised when one turns out to be straight. Like it's just like, really? All right, okay, I guess like you do you. But like, so you can create that kind of abundance in your head and in your life and in what you're reading, and in the voices that you have in your head, in your close writer friends. And I think that feels like a much better place to be, and a place where there's so much less anxiety. And the one other thing I'd add is I think Carmen Maria Machado, who's one of our contributors, at one of our other events, someone asked, you know, like, how do I know that my fiction is queer enough? Like I worry that like it's not queer enough and that like I'm not talking about enough queer things. And Carmen was like, you're queer enough. Just like the way you do that is like you're queer. Just be queer and write. Then you're like, your fiction is queer. Like your nonfiction is queer. It doesn't even matter. Like you could write about a heterosexual couple, like, I don't know, in England getting married, and it's still queer because you're a queer writer. And so like maybe just like trying to walk away from that anxiety as much as I know that it's all pervasive and we all feel it. Just trying to like tell yourself like this anxiety I don't even have to consider this, I think might be, at least for me, I find that to be freeing. Let's see, and there's a question from Claire who asks, and I think this is the last question we have time for maybe, but we'll see. Claire says, I wonder if anyone can share a response they received or a connection they made because of their work in the anthology that stands out in some way. What a heartening question. Thank you for that, Claire.
I can't point to like a specific response, but I have received like some notes where people have been like, hey, you really like nailed something about relationships that I was trying to articulate. And that was my goal. So I'm happy that it resonated with some people.
For me personally, it really made me smile that a lot of people connected to Tina and they felt like, oh, I want more of her. I thought that was just really sweet because, you know, sometimes people have preconceived notions of trans women sex workers. So it was very nice that people just liked her for who she was and didn't judge her profession. And that just touched me because I wasn't expecting that at all. So thank everyone who enjoyed Tina and enjoyed just her.
I was actually really happy to connect with Zeyn Joukhadar, who is another contributor in Kink and who is also trans. And we spoke yesterday at an event for a UK bookstore for Kink, and it was great to be in conversation with him and just talk about our work and make this other friend that I wouldn't have had if it weren't for this anthology. So yeah, that has been really wonderful.
And I'll add that one moment that stands out is when an Asian woman thanked me for writing a story, a kinky story with an Asian character in it, because she was just like, I've literally never read that. And that made me cry, you know, like the extent to which the work we do is still sometimes a first for people. And I still want the world to not be that way. And I feel as though like all of you are working toward that world where fewer of us have to be first for anything. And yeah, so thank you for that. So, okay, All right, so Kate says, we're happy to go a little over. Okay, well, maybe just like quickly, round, I don't know. Let's just quickly, Archie says, what did you learn in the process of writing your pieces for Kink that you'll take forward into future projects / stories? Also, thank you all so much for reading. And maybe I'll just answer that quickly with, what did I learn while writing the piece for Kink? Honestly, truly, and with putting out this book, I was so anxious about writing the story and about putting it it's more sexually explicit than anything I've ever written. And it really just helped to learn that like it didn't kill me, you know, like the fear didn't kill me, like the fear isn't going to kill me, like, and that seems so obvious, and I'm not sure that my body understood that that's the case.
The one thing I learned from that, like I said earlier, that I was just very touched that people welcome themselves to a trans woman character, which people may not see every day or may not even look for every day. So it was just really refreshing to know that, you know, a trans woman character can be in an anthology like this and be accepted. I just think that's just cool. I mean, what more can I ask for? So that's my one takeaway, that, you know what, I mean, it can happen. So thank you so much.
I think for me, I was like, I think sometimes anthologies like this can be framed in terms of like, we're pushing narratives and like making it okay, which, I mean, this is not that it wasn't framed this way, but I found a lot of solace in being like, well, you know, my characters are going to be like kind of shitty to each other, and they're maybe not going to have like a super healthy understanding of their relationship or of kink, and it's okay if I write that, and it's like no one is like, it's going to be okay. Like I don't have to write like a super sanitized or super like how-to guide for a reader. Like I think the reader can handle a little bit of ambiguity, and I think like as a writer of color, as an Asian woman, like sometimes I feel a responsibility to do educating in my writing, and it was nice to just kind of not do that this time around.
Yeah, totally, Larissa. Sort of realizing that you can trust the reader, or at least the readers who will understand your work in the way that it's meant to be read, and some people won't. And some people might think that, you know, the story that is of mine that's included in Kink is not sexy at all. There's no sex, there's no kink, there's none of that going on. Where's the sex in this story? But it has been really gratifying to hear from people who did really resonate with that story within the context of this book. And so I think learning that, you know, those who will respond to my work moving forward are out there, and just trusting that they will engage with what I put down on the page in a way that will make me understand my work better in the future as well. That's always really great.
I think is Kate going to, I think that might be the last question. Thank you all so much for being here. And I will give the floor to Kate.
Thank you so much. So thank you all for being here. That was really fantastic. We feel so lucky to be part of this important anthology's online tour. So thank you again to Larissa, Cal, Vanessa, and RO for sharing your work with us. And special thanks to RO for leading such a great conversation there. That was wonderful. And thanks, Leona, for helping us with introductions as well. I just want to mention that RO is slated to be one of our headliners for last year's festival. So of course we were upset that we had to cancel that, but we're so fortunate to have her here with us tonight. And in honor of her being one of our headliners last year, we wanted to show you this tiny book series that she's part of, and thank her for partnering with us to be part of this series. This is a new tiny book series that we're doing with the Spokane Print and Publishing Center, where we're going to be publishing one festival author each year in these gorgeous hand-printed, hand-bound chapbooks. So thank you again for that. And you can order those on our website, or you can find them here in Spokane at From Here in the River Park Square Mall. Thank you again to our live audience for tuning in. You'll be able to revisit this anytime. Just make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. We hope that you'll join us for additional festival events, including tomorrow night's first ever virtual pie and whiskey, starting at 8 p.m. Pacific. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please make sure to click the donate button under this video to help support Get Lit and help us build a festival for next year. And thank you again for joining us. Good night, everybody. As we're live, I'll just keep holding these up so everyone can see how beautiful these chapbooks are. Goodbye, everybody. All right, 20 seconds.